get busy, B. Authenticity lives with me, I get busy, B. Authenticity lives with me, I get busy, B. Black boy, gone, put your hands up. Black girl, gone, put your hands up. Black boy, gone, put your hands up. Black girl, gone, put your hands up. If you got your hands up, I bet you understand, but we're not the ones on camera. Those souls are trapped there. If you had got your hands up, I bet you understand, but we're not the ones on camera. Those souls are trapped there. Keep a cool head, Mr. Officer. Keep a cool head, Your Honor, sir. Keep a cool head, Mrs. Officer. Keep a cool head. Niggas who are not the one. I got many niggas who ain't make it from 92. Night and day I heard the slam playing all on the news. As I wonder if I'm next year's children laugh, call us all the coons. I'm a gamer, yeah, they say the same things when I'm online with you. Flow proper, showstopper, bounce with me, hope thotta. Ladies so proper, I collect bounties on the mic. Rappers write they rhymes and I'm listening like, no, nada. Authenticity lives with me, I get busy, B. 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 Dame the type you catch.
What is going on, y'all? It's your boy DameSmiff, and we out here with another episode of Musician Talks. And we're gonna have a pretty interesting conversation about how there is a huge, I guess you can say, war on sexual assault, rapists, and things of the like, right? And so the reason we're covering this here, and this is a musician's channel, but the reason we're covering this here is because there is a lot of, I guess you could say, merging of conversations when it comes to the overarching discussion about assaults and the nature of assaults and things like that, right? And so I can give my personal opinions. We're going to learn some statistics. We're going to see some news and some facts and things like that. And then also learn the great positive new, I guess you can say, milestones we're seeing in law enforcement, technology, and of course, culture and things like that. So if you're interested in conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button because that will let people know that this is a dope conversation. And then also subscribe so that way you can catch my latest videos and understand what is going on and things like that, right? So to lay a bit of, I guess you could say, the foundation of this conversation out for this particular channel here, right? Being that this is a musician's channel, the real focus here is that a lot of the, I guess you can say, situations from either my experience or stories that I've heard surrounding this topic with regards to the music industry stem from a lot of how we view these certain situations, right? So let's say someone gets inappropriately touched in a club, nightclub, festival, or something like that. Someone gets, let's say, actually like just brutally attacked or something like that. And then they come out years later or after the fact and things like that. All of these situations play a role in how we view the environment in which we choose to work in as artists, and as well as the environments we place our co-workers, employees, and fans in, right? So I do this video very, very, very lightly and understanding it's a sensitive topic, but I do come with it with the kind of bold opinion in that there is a bit of responsibility in how we as artists play a role in the environments that we set up for our fans and our fellow musicians, okay? And so that opinion really comes from the fact that a lot of how I've structured my musical career has come from my own decisions, right? So choosing the instrument I play, choosing the style of music I play, choosing who I cooperate with and work with and things like that, and why. So all of these things are decisions that I have control over. And a part of what influences those decisions is who's going to be involved in the environment, right? So if I was 16, 17, 18, 19, I didn't really care that I was going to be at a rap show in the back of a nightclub, a low budget nightclub that doesn't really have a big name or heavy security or things like that. I wouldn't think about that, right? But then as you start growing and getting a little bit more responsibility amongst yourself and things like that, And it doesn't even have to be like family. It can just be you have, let's say, roadies, people that carry your equipment. Let's say you're collaborating with a fellow artist who has a really big name or high status or something like that. Inviting people into certain environments takes a bit of responsibility, right? And so, in one hand, I've heard people say, hey, if you come to my town or if you want to collaborate with me, I'm willing to show you the best of times and give you, like, first class flights and stuff like that. And then on another hand, some people want you to kind of navigate the world how you can navigate it and just do the job, right? So it's really an opinion. I can really sit here and just say I prefer idealistically that everything goes the way I want it to go. But the world will show you in reality that there are actually people who view this differently, but they will be very either powerful or highly participant in your culture, which in this channel would be the music culture. And so when I think about singer-songwriters that are men or women, but especially the younger singer-songwriters, and they want to have a bit of notoriety, I think about all the things that come with that, right? One of the biggest things that they try to navigate is who's in the room with them, right? And that in general just means when I'm on stage singing my song as a female artist, or if I'm on stage singing my song as a male artist, who is listening? What's going on there, right? And that can be like, man, I want it to be fans. I want it to be the most popular, more powerful A&Rs from cool record labels. I want it to be other musicians that maybe appreciate what I'm doing and are highly skilled. But then the conversation goes into, well, who do I not want into the room, right? And so when we are trying to consider this, oftentimes that conversation gets blurred because there is a bit of entitlement coming to and from artists. Now, for musicians, that's kind of like widely understood. We know that if you're really good at something, there's going to be people that don't like you that will come to your shows, and people that do like you that will come to your shows. And the thing that's attracting them is consistent, which is your musical skill, right? Or maybe it's how you look or something, right? And so what we then find as musicians is that as we navigate the world going through these different environments, whether it's different gigs, different countries, different cultures, different networks and friends and people and, societies and stuff like that, as we navigate these things as musicians, not just people, we start to realize that we begin to blur a bit of how we view these societies and these cultures and things like that, right? So in order to bridge that gap, I want to really show, like I said in the beginning, my opinion on how we should really navigate certain situations when it comes to specifically musicians, because this is a greater conversation to be had about culture. But I also want to bridge the gap in between how fans and the audience views these situations in relations to who you guys actually like watching for entertainment, in situations, right? And the only way I believe we can do this is if we have accurate understanding of what it is we're talking about and understand how to actually, I guess you can say, process a lot of this new information that we're about to get, right? So one of the big things that has come out recently is the United Kingdom has made a pamphlet that apparently discusses how not to rape, right? And so for most people that were looking at this and reacting to it, it seemed like a jarring kind of like, whoa, I can't believe we've come to this moment. But what it showed me was that for the longest time, people have been kind of having this underlying conversation, not with just the UK, but the world in general, in how we treat and respect and view women in the world, right? And then in the other hand, they do the same with people who do this towards men and just children, right? So now that we've actually gotten to the point to where people are putting out pamphlets to tell people how this is, it told me that there has to be either more people that disagree with the information in the pamphlet or that truly do not understand the information in the pamphlet, right? Because if you were to allow a lot of the movies and media that discuss this topic, as we did last week, They would lead you to believe through influence done by writers and actors. So really we do this in media with free will, but it would lead you to believe that a lot of these bad actors or the people that commit these crimes and things like that are solely doing it just because they're evil or just because there's some kind of like power structure going on in this individual's head, right? But what we're going to kind of find out is that this issue kind of bleeds into the perspective people have about themselves, as well as the perspective people have about the world they live in. So to give you an example, right? You know to keep your hands to yourself, right? Put a 1 in the chat if you think that's true. But you also know that someone else can and may be willing to put their hands on you. Which one of you needs a pamphlet? And so as we have this discussion, it's really just to show you as musicians, when you're placing yourself in certain environments, what you will need to what would you need in order to defend yourself, prepare yourself, and preserve yourself in terms of shaping and developing your environment. Because a lot of what we tend to place ourselves into, we believe we're not susceptible to because it's not close to home, or we really just don't understand what had happened. That's actually a big part of what we're going to talk about today. A lot of people really don't understand, which is the point of the pamphlet, what they're doing or what had happened to them. Which, you know, on the surface level, it would be reasonable for you to think that to be uncommon. It'd be reasonable for me to think that someone hearing me say that you may not know what you're doing is wrong as like delusional or crazy, but apparently, like I said, as we're going to learn, that is a thing where there's a large group of people, men and women, young and old, that think these kinds of behaviors, there's nothing wrong with it. And so we're going to navigate how those people are going to have to deal with the fact that that is wrong. I guess you can say in a sense, right? So our first topic is actually where we're going to be breaking down how rapid infrastructure breaks down and security lapses directly impact touring artists, performers, and public safety. So we're going to start with the developing situation in Ceuta, Spain. I hope I'm saying that right. And this is where a massive border surge has completely overwhelmed the local systems, leading to a severe safety risk on the ground, right? So between 70,000 to 80,000 migrants crossed from Morocco into Ceuta within days, primarily swimming around breakwaters or crossing shorelines. So they basically, if it's within days, then they probably were swimming overnight or on boats and stuff like that, right? So all of the dangers that come with not knowing who these tens of thousands of people that are now entering into your country and wandering around, eating, pooping, and, you know, sleeping and consuming. You also don't know what they have, what happened to them, because some of them may have gotten injured or died or made a mistake or something, you know, on the way over. There's so many different problems you want to navigate for, especially if you care about the well-being of people. So these people are probably triggered by smuggling networks and viral social media rumors falsely claiming that the borders were completely open, following in June where the Spanish Supreme Court ruled on the border. So I believe that the border was something along the lines of, if they get to the country by boat, they can't be turned back, or by sea. I think that's what it was. And so they actually have reception centers for them. And reception centers in general, like if you were to think about how they are meant to be used, they're meant to be used in a way to where, quote unquote, I guess ideally a reasonable amount of people would be coming into your country for, you know, general asylum seeking reasons. Maybe there's like a surge in resources or whatever could be the problem, right? And then you would use a bit of your resources to maybe house and get them better and then move them to better situations that make sense. That's how we generally would like this to work, right? But apparently they exceeded capacity by 2,400%. 2,400%, leaving thousands of them unsheltered on beaches and hillsides. I seen a video by this really cool Asian dude, and he was talking about, I think his name is Wani. I think that's how you say it, Wani. And he was talking about how over in Asia, I think it was China, they have like a heating problem. And they had to basically deal with all of the older people and sometimes the even school children that would just sit in the middle of the malls and the stores and things like that, because the stores had free air conditioning. Everybody else had to pay for their air conditioning. So you can see how just shifting infrastructure like that can create a problem, right? So like the stores had like hallways full of people or aisles full of people where you couldn't even shop. Like it would just be like 2 or 3 rows of just literal humans just in the way of all the products, right? So now imagine that's happening, but the people aren't citizens, and it's not because of air conditioning. They're strangers. You don't know who they are, and they don't really know where to go or what to do type of thing, right? So they're just sitting along the beaches. They have actual videos of people arriving to the beach on boats and things like that, right? So this has actually gotten to the point to where the police unions and local health authorities documented multiple sexual assaults and severe harassment, particularly impacting women and minors living in makeshift camps with zero security infrastructure. So if we were to think about how and why that's a possibility, it comes from the fact that out of, would they say 70 to 80,000 people came in, we don't know what percentage of them are criminals that go completely against what your ideals are, right? And so like I say about fans and artists, if you were to think about where you would be performing, what kind of music you're creating and who would be attracted to your music, if you were to put your ideal fan in a room with 59,000 other versions of them, what is the percentage of them getting out of that safely, you know? And so it's something we don't feel as though we have responsibility for as artists, but it is something that people cosmically kind of feel about music and the experience of going to concerts today. I'll give you an example. When gangster rap became a big popular trendy genre of music here, it was hard for hip hop artists, just regular hip hop artists, to get bookings because of the venue owners feeling as though if they were to invite hip hop into their venues, they would then be inviting the criminal element into their venue, thus putting their customers in danger. So if you're a hip hop artist and you were thinking like, man, that's crazy, you're dumb, man, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that. Well, you can say that. But then if you have any instances, which is what they were using as justification for their perspective, if you have any instances of you performing at a show and someone coming there to air out a beef, or they're coming there to fight you, or if they come there just because you bring that kind of violent energy, then yeah, you're going to get that stigma. At least a reasonable person would believe so, right? Would you need a pamphlet to tell you that, right? And so when we have municipal security and basic infrastructure fail, late night transit, local venue routes, and crew accommodations become active safety hazards for touring personnel and fans. Just imagine you're filming a show or playing a show and a reporter or something has to come out of town to stay in a hotel, and it's now become like dangerous for her to be there and things like that. Like, that's not cool, right? But you wouldn't think that you would need a pamphlet to understand that. And this pamphlet that I'm talking about, we're actually going to go over it together before we get into the first video, because I wanted actually to lay the foundation of everything. But really, that first story about Spain is just to show you how this can all come at random. But at the same time, if you have certain situations like the Supreme Court ruling, these are things we can actually pay attention to in real time as artists if we want to care about these types of topics. So let's actually take a look at this pamphlet from the UK and get right into what they're talking about. Then I think we can make a little bit of sense to what we're looking at here. then I think we can make a little bit of sense to what we're looking at here. It's still strange that we need a pamphlet, but we will go through this and understand. We will go through this and understand why we may need a pamphlet. So here's the actual table of contents of the pamphlet. It's not very long because it really doesn't need to be, but it has living in the UK, gender equality, domestic abuse, sex and consent, respect in public, and then also ways to get help. So it says here, well, let me actually make this larger for myself so I can get nice and cozy with the text here. Okay. So it's cozy with the text here. Okay. So it says here, you are in the United Kingdom. Now remember, this spoken direction is from, I guess, the United Kingdom citizenship and things like that towards asylum seekers. You are in the United Kingdom because you are seeking asylum. We understand that coming to a new country can be difficult and that laws and customs here may be different from your home country. In the UK, there are laws that protect everyone's safety, dignity, and rights. It is important that you understand them because not following UK law can have serious consequences. You could get in trouble with the police, lose your asylum support, or it could affect your asylum claim. This booklet will help you understand what is expected of you when living in the UK. These rules and expectations are not just for people seeking asylum. Okay, so there we go. It's for everyone. They apply to everyone living here. If you have questions about anything in this booklet, speak to staff at your accommodation or contact Migrant Help at this phone number or use their web chat here. And then it says, if you or someone you know needs help because of abuse, violence, or crime, there's a list of organizations that can support you at the end of the booklet. Okay, so two things stand out here for me. One, the main thing here is that there is no mention of what we're about to get into in this first page here. Okay, it mentions crime in general, but it doesn't necessarily mention the specificity of what we're about to get into, which is a little strange to me because this really could have been like a welcome to the UK kind of booklet, but it seems like there is specificity to this as far as domestic violence, gender dynamics, and gender equality, right? But it wasn't mentioned here. So that's weird. The second thing was that there is, let me see if I can find it again. I'm reading. The second thing was that it seems to not really mention anything as far as UK culture. It's like absent of UK culture. It seems to be very generic, which begs the question as to why it's talking about living in the UK, right? It seems very common sense. You know, it should just be like living. Basically what I'm trying to figure out is if you're going to use this is for asylum seekers or this is for everyone, then who would this be for? Like, if this is for everyone, who are the people that this is for? You know? So again, I'm pretty sure asylum seekers have people who would vehemently agree with this pamphlet and just be like, yeah, this is common sense. I don't know why we need, you know, but at the same time, who does this pamphlet believe it's talking to, right? So on the front, it had asylum seekers. On this one, so like I said, most people are going to focus on that, but let's get through this because the more annoying part is just that this needs to exist anyway. So it says gender equality. This is our first, I guess you can say, chapter. In the UK, men and women have equal rights. This is an important part of UK culture and is protected by law. Okay. That right there makes me think that you're gonna have to have some kind of clear understanding of what UK culture is as we go through this, because it just clearly said that is UK culture, which means men and women having equal rights is of a different culture, right? And so the reason I'm exploring this is because as musicians, we're going to find ourselves, and I've explored this topic probably about 3 or 4 times now, not this specific topic, but something like it. We're going to find ourselves in environments that may or may not agree that you have equal rights to them as a man or a woman, right? And you as a male artist, you may have female employees. You as a female artist, you may be the female in the situation, so we're navigating this piece by piece just to kind of understand what we're looking at here. Okay. So this says women can work and earn their own money. So that means there's a demographic of people who disagree with that. Study and go to school or university. There's a demographic of people who disagree with that. So this would then be a female musician who's an entrepreneur, independent. She's working and making her own money through music. That's what that would look like. This woman would then also have gone to school for music or gone to school to understand the business of music or whatever tools and technology she needed to thrive in music. You see it? You see how I'm breaking this down? Okay. Women can travel freely, and I'm only going by the pamphlet. So then this musician couldn't work and earn her money, wouldn't be able to go to school for music or any technology needed to get successful in music, or travel freely to get gigs. The next bullet, it says women can choose what they marry, can choose who they marry and choose not to marry. Again, somebody would have to disagree with that for this to need to have been said, right? And then lastly, make their own decisions about their lives. Now, I'm harking on these bullet points because the specificity is missing here, which makes me think with my own opinion that they're not directly speaking to another group of people. So, ladies, when you hear this means that this isn't like a uniform that some dude or group of dudes could put on and you'd notice. That means that on any of those 5 bullet points you've seen up there, a dude could think that way and look and talk and walk and, breathe just like you and be of the same culture. Because again, in this pamphlet here, at least, this is for everyone, right? And so as I bridge this gap to my artists and musicians, navigating this can be very sensitive for people, right? And so there's some people who they may believe 1 or 2 or all of these bullet points, but they are quote unquote powerful, successful, have high status or notoriety in the music industry. And then you coming along trying to cooperate with them may not know this about them because it's not important, right? If you think about it, it's not important that you know your A&R doesn't believe in you being able to choose who you marry. It could be a reason for that, and they're not naming it in this pamphlet, right? But him believing in that doesn't necessarily stop you from getting a paycheck alongside him if you decide to work at, let's say, their record label, right? Or visit, let's say, a place that maybe has a group of people that think this way, but they're not being specific in the pamphlet, so I'm not really trying to be specific either. But if there are situations where women have to navigate a work environment alongside these different stipulations, it does beg the question, who would need the pamphlet, right? So it then says, women do not need permission from a husband, father, brother, or any other man to do any of these things. Men and women are treated equally by the law, by employers, by schools, and by services like hospitals and police. It is against the law to treat someone unfairly because of their gender. So like things like this that were just said seem to be vague. Like it seems to just kind of be overarching, just like, yeah, men and women are equal, and they just explained it. But who would need this pamphlet, right? Now, most people, as they're going to cover this pamphlet, they're going to try to lead it to like, oh, it's men. Oh, it's creeps. Oh, it's this religious group like Christians, or this religious group like Muslims, or this religious group like this or that. It's this terrorist group, it's that terrorist group, it's these guys, it's these guys. It's the old men, it's the young men, it's the poor men, it's the rich and elite. They're gonna say it all, right? But that begs the question as to, okay, if you were to be a female musician and you gather this information, how would you navigate this, right? So here's how I would navigate this, I guess, through the lens of me being your A&R or your manager, right? If I was your manager and this pamphlet comes out, right? This would then mean that one of two things. I would be, okay, let's do the sleazy manager route. The sleazy manager route means that the value of a woman just gone up. The preciousness, the sanctity, the honor, the beauty, all the great things that are what makes a woman has just gone up 10x because of this pamphlet right here and how stupid people can be. But the sleaziness in that is that we could monetize that. We could then try to, put a carrot on a stick to try to make this marketable for music, right? The other side of this as a manager would then make this a thing that, oh, we could actually have a conversation about this through your music or through your, I guess you can say, your brand in a way, right? Because much of what women have a conversation about in the music industry is this equality and things like that, equal pay, understanding equal notoriety, and making sure the work environment, which is the biggest part of this, is the work environment is safe, right? So if you have women who want to be in work environments where they want to perform for men, they're attracted to men, they like men, they love the male gaze, but they want it to be safe. They want to make their own money. They want to be able to learn and study and travel the things they want to do, or learn about what they want to learn, and then choose their husband and things like that. They want to do that at the same time. Well, then how do we make that a reality for them in the UK if we have pamphlets like this coming out for the men there, right? So it also has here on the bottom, before we move on, what could happen if you do not follow these rules, which is, I guess, the consequences, right? Treating someone unfairly because of their gender can have serious consequences. If your behavior is controlling or threatening, it may also be treated as domestic abuse, which is a crime. You could get into trouble with the police, lose your accommodation, which is your asylum seeking accommodation, and support, and it could affect your asylum claim. And there is more information about domestic abuse in the next section. So, again, this is probably going to bleed into greater conversations amongst other content creators about like, oh, now I can't be brutish with my girlfriend without her pulling this pamphlet out, or girls trying to use this as like a dramatization of bad dates or bad relationships and things like that. But the real thing, I think, domestic abuse, which is you're now within the relationship or within the, I guess you can say, household or confines of the relationship. Okay. So domestic abuse is when someone hurts, threatens, or controls their partner or family member. It can happen to anyone, regardless of their gender, age, or background. Domestic abuse includes physical violence, hitting, pushing, kicking, or physical harm. Threats are saying you will hurt someone or making them afraid. Controlling behavior is controlling someone's money, where they go, or who they can see. Emotional abuse is criticism, humiliation, or making someone feel worthless. Taking away documents means keeping someone's passport or identity documents from them. So if we stop here, this is usually where most dating podcasts are going to hover. They're going to hover right around here, right? They're not really going to dive into like the more criminal aspect. They're going to hover around like the how far are relationships going to go before they're too toxic in a way to where it's like beyond the two people involved's control, right? And so there's the conversation about men beating women, women beating men, parents beating children, children beating parents. That is a thing. And then, of course, siblings fighting each other and things like that. When you think about these things, there is a kind of like cultural aspect, right? We recently saw a story of a mom who wilded out on her son because he apparently was up late at night streaming on his video game. And she walked into the room and was upset with him and started like pulling out plugs and wires and stuff out of the computer. They started arguing live on the stream. She started actually putting her hands on him. Now, most people seeing that were saying she should go to jail. She should be, charged criminally and things like that. The other side of that conversation was that is also normal behavior in many households. White, black, Asian, young, old, liberal, conservative, that kind of quote unquote violence, because some people don't view it as violence. Again, guys, I know you don't like to hear it, but someone needs to read this pamphlet, right? But that kind of quote unquote violence is actually normal in some households, to the point to where it's an option. Like, it's not a last resort, it's an option, right? And so what we're starting to see now, because of the widespread of cameras, social media, and things like that, we're starting to actually have to bridge that conversation between what is normal, what is acceptable behavior amongst how we treat each other, right? And so domestic abuse would be, like I described, a mom putting her hands on her son. Now, the son, I think he was 18 in the video, and they apparently had like previous arguments and things like that. So it's been escalating over time to get to the point to where the live stream video happened. But what made it so controversial was that the son actually had a situation where on the stream, the live stream, 10,000 people had apparently joined, and he had made a whole bunch of money suddenly. And that's kind of the nature of streaming, where if you can set it up properly, you can get a large amount of people joining as an audience. But maybe mom didn't understand it, or she just didn't like it or agree with it, or maybe she's just sick of her son. She didn't really care about that part. And I think people caring about the audience being there and the amount of people and how valuable that is to a streamer made the story more polarizing than just seeing a mom put her hands on her son. Now, why am I explaining that? I'm explaining that because when I had seen that story, that reminded me of the many times I've heard stories of musicians, especially female musicians, but musicians being done dirty, being done wrong. And the only reason we cared about it was because we liked their music. Where I've had other stories that would parallel that, and we don't give a crap at all because we don't like their music as much, right? Stories where certain artists will go to jail on false claims. Certain artists will go to jail because of shootings or club shootings and things like that. We've had certain artists that'll go to jail for abuse, sexual abuse, or muggings and things like that. And because their music isn't as popular as, say, what the streaming algorithm would like us to believe, the support behind the behavior that they're a victim to isn't there, right? Not so much that we don't think it's wrong. It's just that we're not going to put all our, coins on this one artist in terms of saving them from the domestic abuse that we're witnessing them go through, right? And it can go either way, man, woman, old, young, we'll see it in many, 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 many different ways. But had that young man not gotten a 10,000 view uptick in his stream, this would have just seemed like some mom just whooping her kid late at night because he keeps playing video games and keeps yelling. So just as we navigate this, a part of what we're going to talk about is how we view this stuff, okay? Because like I said, some people thought that mom should go to jail. Some people were like, yeah, that's kind of like typical for most moms. Like, we're not really new to this, right? So the pamphlet says, what is expected of you? So you are expected to treat your partner and family with respect. I already don't like that bullet point. I feel like that's too vague because some of y'all don't understand what respect actually means, nor do you like treating people with respect. The next bullet says, you are expected to let them make their own choices. There are some people that don't agree with that. You are expected to never physically or verbally abuse or control them. And then it says domestic abuse is a serious crime in the UK. If you do any of the behaviors in the list, you could be arrested and go to prison, lose your accommodation and support, and it could affect your asylum claim. They just keep adding that tag there, right? And if you are experiencing domestic abuse, so this is for the victim now. So this is the conversation I really thought this pamphlet was going to be for. Like, just from the jump, I thought this was going to be an entire pamphlet on how to catch and, prevent and criminalize people who do this, not really stop you from being the whatever. Anyway, it says, if you are experiencing domestic abuse, you do not have to stay with someone who hurts or controls you. Help is available and you will be treated with dignity and respect. That is actually a great point. A big part of, I guess, the abuse factor is that people have in their mind fear. They use fear to coerce you into doing things that you don't want to do, or like trapping you in places like that, right? And so, of course, being who I am, I don't like seeing people being victimized. I don't like bullies. I hate bullies. So seeing victims behave as victims, I hate seeing that too. So pardon me if you see a part of my opinion come out, a lot of the behaviors, but this is a part of what makes, I guess you can say, this conversation so touchy, is that, you can't choose to be a victim in a lot of cases. It just is what it is. So it says, reporting abuse will not negatively affect your asylum claim. That's actually good. Domestic abuse hotlines, and they have here the domestic abuse hotline, that number, Women's Aid in Scotland, and then Live Fear Free helpline in Wales, and then domestic abuse helpline in Northern Ireland, I think it says there. And then it has a few more numbers there. So as we go through this, just keep in mind that the greater point here is that this is a war. It's not necessarily like, this ain't scary to see. This is kind of like, who needs to see this? It's just, you should identify who needs to see this, right? Sex and consent. So now we're going into the consent aspect and the actual sex part of, I guess you can say, assaults, right? This is more so, again, I think what most people are going to be so polarized about in this conversation is the consent part. Now, I'll say this personally. Personally, I don't know why consent is such a muddy water conversation. I don't get it, how you don't understand how yes or no is. Like I said, we're going to learn that together. But then on the other hand, here in the United States, we have different states that have different ages of consents and like different laws on like who can raise a kid and who can get married and things like that. So it varies even over here. So I can't just sit up here and say like, over here in the United States, we do it different. So it could be very much similar to one, if not many states, just like compared to the UK. So consent means both people freely agree to sex or sexual conduct. So what does that mean? Let's stop right there. What does that mean? That means that she wants to have sex. This part right here is usually the most controversial. And I know you're like, what? Really? The first sentence? Yes. It is the most controversial because rarely ever have people in history had sex off of a handshake. I mean, outside of like actual sex work and prostitution, rarely do you find a girl you like, walk up to her and just literally just offer sex. And then she goes, possibly. And then she declines or agrees. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's a bit of a dance, right? And so I think that is why the first couple pages laid out what they laid out before about respect and actually just treating people up front before that, because sex is usually not a conversation. I know as much as we try to advocate that to be as such, even since I was in like middle school, they wanted us to talk about sex, talk. Rarely is it a conversation. And it's not a sexy conversation that advocates for sex when you have it. So what people are having trouble with and why this is controversial is because saying yes isn't usually said out loud. It usually is not verbal. So for one guy who may have grown up one way, he may think of a yes to look a way. And then that's going to be different from this guy to this guy to this guy to this guy and so forth and so forth. And then you flip it over to the women and it's the exact same with the women. One woman may think, oh, this guy's buying me drinks. He must like me. But then another woman may think, oh, he's buying me drinks. That's what he's supposed to do on a date. It's a completely different conversation, right? So that's why that literal sentence right there is probably the most controversial. But it does beg the question as to who would then need this pamphlet, right? So in the UK, the law is clear and strict. Both people must agree to have sex or sexual contact of any kind. And this means both people must say yes freely without threat or pressure. So threat or pressure can look like two different things for each, I guess you can say. Threats can look like an actual, like, I'm going to hurt you threat, right? So if you hear that, that is wrong, completely wrong. You did not get consent. And then the other version of a threat could be coercion. It could be, well, what would your parents think? Or it could be along the lines of like, don't let my husband find out. Or you're going to lose your promotion. Think about the job. Think about the gig and things like that. And I hear this a lot from, I guess, stories from musicians where they will be in situations where it won't be as extreme as just sex, but it could be coercion in the sense of image. Maybe you don't feel like sexualizing yourself as a female, but they're telling you, well, what about the gig? What about the fans and things like that, right? Pressure, in my opinion, would be two totally different things. Pressure would be time, urgency. Like you have to make a decision so quick, meaning like you're in a fight. That's one extreme. And then the other extreme would be you have about 10 minutes to figure out if you're going to take this new photo shoot that's nude, or you don't take the photo shoot and lose out on the money. Pressure. The other version of pressure could be peer pressure, social pressure. If you're this is the whole Puff Daddy conversation, elitist musician conspiracy theory conversation. But if you're in a room or a party or a back rooms after party or something like that, and everybody's doing drugs and alcohol, it is possible that if you were to take these drugs and alcohol, that your body could pass out and people would then grope and touch on you and do inappropriate things to you without your consent. Right? You wouldn't be able to consent to that. But if you were in the room saying yes to all the drugs, this is what happened with Bill Cosby, saying yes to all the drugs, and then Bill decides he wants to touch you, you can't say no. So if he's of the guys who thinks you are, I guess, remember those bullet points that we read in the first two pages? If he's of the guys that believes any of those bullet points, then Bill Cosby, whatever religion, race, or age he is at the time, would then take advantage of that. Just simply off of what he believes in the opportunity and the circumstances, right? And so for female artists, this is super important to understand because it's a huge safety risk, right? And it's disgusting and gross. And then for the guys, it's disgusting and evil, but it's a thing that you're putting yourself into. Like, it's no one's pressuring you to pressure these girls, right? So that's why this conversation is important to have on a clear, I guess you can say objective platform here. If someone, I guess you can say, is feeling pressured, how do you know as a guy, right? Well, the role you have as a guy, from at least my culture, that's why I'm trying to figure out who would need this pamphlet. From my culture, it's up to the guy to pursue how he understands the amount of pressure that girl is feeling. You should have her feeling comfortable. You should have her feeling safe. She should be able to express herself without feeling hesitation or coercion or blackmail or anything like that. But if you're the kind of guy that thinks that, oh no, that works, she's going to do what I said because I got, I don't know, thousands of dollars, or I got a video of her or something like that, or I could, upload a video or something. If you're one of these types of men, then this is going to feel, you're going to have a problem with what I'm saying right now. Okay. But this pamphlet is here to show you that someone can actually change their mind at any time, even if they said yes before. And I believe that to be true too, because unfortunately you can't, just have a black and white yes and then just move on with life, right? If that was the case, then there would be a whole bunch of refunds you guys wouldn't have got. There would have been a whole bunch of things in life you'd be stuck with, right? But the point here, I think that we should really be driving home is that if you plan on getting into relations, like sexual relations with a girl, and at any point she feels doubt or regret or things like that, having her continue through that after she's decided she no longer wants to continue is more of a problem than why she wants to stop, right? Let's say she wants to stop because your breath stinks. Having her continue because your breath stinks and she doesn't want to do that, it's still a problem, okay? And again, we need a pamphlet to tell you that. You didn't know that. But now that you know that, can you think of many, 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 many other reasons a girl would say no after a yes? So if we can consider all of those things, then we can be aware of these things, especially as guys in the music industry, right? And the same for ladies. Sometimes ladies, they get drunk and they want to be at the bar and they want to twerk on you and rub up on you. And as guys, we're kind of like not in the mood maybe. So we may say no, and the ladies might get offended. Ladies, that's still a no, all right? It's still a no. You got to respect that. And it says if someone is asleep, drunk, or unable to respond, they cannot consent. And that's what I explained earlier, right? Consent is needed in every situation. This means even if you are married or in a relationship with someone, they must consent to sex every time. Now, there are actually some people who don't believe that. They believe that you don't have to get consent every time. They feel like you can just say yes at the altar and that's enough, right? But if you're not of the people who believe that, you may not either find it sexy at all to ask for consent or to give consent all the time. So again, this is another controversial conversation. So let me know in the chat, is it sexier to have that conversation and actually get consent each time and say, you know what, I want to have sex with you, or at least make it, like I said, it's not as verbal all the time, but make seduction obvious, I guess you can say. Would you rather that, or would you rather it not be every single time, right? You'd rather it be understood. So that is a blurred line that is usually crossed by people who have different cultures, or they may have different, I guess you can say, triggers when it comes to, I guess, their emotional responses. Some people get drunk or angry and things like that, and they just feel that they are entitled to people in a way, right? Or they have some kind of power trip and things like that. And they use this talking point to blur that line. So if you believe in that line being blurred, then how do you navigate the possibility of someone feeling as though you wrong them if they say no, right? So it's something you should pay attention to. And of course, as people who are in certain situations where you feel entitled to someone, you may feel kind of icky if, someone feels like they don't want to give you a yes for sexual, as you say, conduct. You feel kind of icky if they say no and you try to pressure them going forward. So it kind of ruins the intimacy either going forward or just in general. So perhaps understanding that about each other makes it better. So I'll give you an example. Let's say your girl is the type that's like, oh, I just wish you would just take it all the time, right? And girls say that, and what they mean is that they just want you to have like this kind of like spontaneity, be passionate, right? But for guys, what that actually looks like isn't quote unquote cool, okay? So what girls are asking for a lot of times in its situation is something that is not quote unquote cool to and from a lot of guys, right? To guys, meaning we don't find it cool to just always act on our sexual urges in general. Like the gentlemen, at least of society, don't necessarily think it's cool to just walk around smacking butt and groping women. So then when we get to our woman, we kind of translate that information, but it doesn't benefit us. We get punished for that, right? But then on the other hand, we also don't think it's cool to see dudes doing that, which is why this greater conversation that we're having about this pamphlet is being had. Because if you see dudes doing that to just women in general, as you guys, as ladies, are asking for dudes to just come on and be passionate, it looks crazy because you don't know who the women are, right? But then it also looks crazy because it's a health risk usually, right? So that's why the training that most people would have in this conversation about getting consent every time is to get consent every time. That's what the pamphlet says, right? So as artists and things like that, You could be in the studio with somebody that thinks like this. You could be getting in a relationship with somebody that thinks like this, and you're supposed to be the super empowered artist that's supposed to stand up for themselves and things like that. So going forward in the pamphlet, it says, if you have sex with someone without their consent, this is called rape. Rape is a serious crime in the UK. You could go to prison, lose your support and accommodation, and it will affect your asylum claim. Again, they just copy and paste it yet again. So what is expected of you? You are expected to always make sure the other person freely or clearly agrees to sex or sexual contact. You are expected to never use threats, force, or pressure to make someone have sex. You are expected to never try to have sex with someone who is asleep, drunk, or unable to consent clearly. And you are expected to stop if they say no or change their mind. That's what you're expected on paper, all right? The legal age of consent, and this is where the United States just has like a Wild West thing, but the legal age of consent in the UK is 18. This means that anyone under the age of 18 is considered a child and cannot legally agree to have sex. Sex with someone under the age of 18 is a serious crime in the UK. There are no exceptions to this rule. Even if they say yes, it is still illegal. You could go to prison, lose your support and accommodation, and it will affect your asylum claim. Okay. The 18-year-old part is, I think, the more, I guess you can say, controversial part for, I guess you can say the younger people that are in like their 20s usually, because there's more of the 20th that are running around dating in the teens than there are like 50, 60-year-old people that are trying to scoop up high schoolers. But that point there is very important to understand, because the 18 number teeters right around that I guess you can say age group where everybody's kind of already having sex, right? So I think the greater issue here is that you need to understand the age of consent, legality, alongside the consent, legality. Because if you think that, oh, well, she's 17 and she says yes, or the big one we like to hear is, oh, she's fast, it does not matter. You will still go to jail. And honestly, if I was any dude who felt like I was quote unquote attracted to 18-year-olds, that this would scare me. I don't know why this doesn't scare you guys. Because if I was an 18-year-old evil villain, just walk around just falsely claiming dudes, I would just weaponize my age all the time. But I don't know why this would be, again, something you would need to put in a pamphlet. And I don't know why. Yeah, anyway, if this happened to you, so this is for the victims again, right at the bottom, at the very bottom there, we're going to finally talk to the victims. If you have experienced sexual abuse or assault, support is available. You will be treated with respect and dignity, and anyone of any age or gender can get help. That is very, very true. The numbers for rape crisis in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland are available at the end of this booklet. And then it says how you can report the police. And so I believe we have like 2 more pages here. So respect in public. So now this is just going out in public, right? And again, this is important to understand because you may be going to these countries and these places, this country and this place as an artist in order to perform or bring your community, your fans and your people out into the city. And y'all want to make a statement, right? But you got to understand what's going on here, right? So respect in public. In the UK, people have different beliefs, religions, cultures, relationships, and ways of life. You must treat others with respect, even if you disagree with their beliefs or how they live. This is another big controversial sentence, but basically, if you are a staunch conservative and you don't like seeing, I don't know, gay black midgets, just let them go be gay black midgets. Just leave them alone. You can say you don't, well, do y'all have freedom of speech in the UK? You can feel how you feel, but just leave the gay black midgets alone, right? What is expected of you? When you are in public spaces, alone or with friends, you must never make sexual comments to someone, even if you think it is a compliment. That right there is going to be super controversial for both men and women. I bet you can't guess why. Because both men and women love making sexual comments to each other, both positively and negatively. You are expected, when you are in public spaces alone or with friends, you must never whistle or make kissing noises at someone. You must never follow someone, block their path. You must never make rude or offensive gestures. And you must never verbally abuse someone because of their gender, religion, or how they look. Taking photographs and videos. In the UK, we respect people's privacy. This means that you should not take photographs or videos of someone without their consent. That's actually a completely different problem for y'all, being outside in the public, getting photos taken of you. But I understand what y'all are saying. And it is a serious crime to take sexual images of someone without their consent or share sexual images of someone without their consent. Now, as we have read this, there's actually one more page, but these are all the ways that you can get help. If you have questions about anything that you have read in this booklet and want more information, speak to your staff at your accommodation, your asylum seeking accommodation. And here are all the different resources you have here. So take a look, go ahead and pause and screenshot whatever you need. But as we have read this, what this has led me to believe is that y'all have a huge problem with taking this serious, not the crime, because it seems like if you know, all right, let me walk my thoughts through this. So if you know that this is such a heavy crime that you need a booklet to put out for the general public, then that means you've been made aware of it. And if you've been made aware of it and you think it's a serious crime, why the booklet? So for me, this looks like it's full circle that you don't actually take this crime serious. You noticed it and it is happening a lot, but you don't take the crime serious. And this is my opinion. I'm speaking directly to the audience now. So a lot of what you'll see with this conversation as we go forward and explore a few different videos is that in order to actually take this conversation serious means that we are going to have to change a lot of how culture looks and change a lot of how we actually view ourselves as well as the opposite gender. So let's get a look at the first topic, which was the Morocco-Spain incident and that whole immigration debacle.
500 Moroccan girls have been transferred to the Spanish mainland after sickening reports of sexual assault occurring in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta.
Ceuta, I'm saying that all wrong. I thought we were saying Ceuta. But 500, and that's of the women that have apparently migrated over, right? There's a TikTok argument, that's what I call them, where it don't really make sense, but it's a talking point, that people will say that it's supposedly worse from the native citizens. But I don't believe that to be as much of a problem as the women who are displaced from a country in general, right? So depending on how you view migration is going to change how you view this conversation, which is why I said about the young man who was on Twitch with his mother, if 10,000 viewers changes the conversation, then just, you should have been to bed when I told you to go to bed.
The assaults occurred following the surge of over 70,000, mostly male Moroccan immigrants, flooded into Ceuta 2 weeks ago, with between 5,000 to 8,000 remaining there to this day, despite Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez ensuring the large majority of them have returned home. Authorities have revealed that over 2,000 minors were registered, a part of the illegal migration into Ceuta, with 15 reports of sexual abuse overwhelming the limited resources in the small city, necessitating transfers to the Spanish mainland to protect the safety of the alleged victims.
Okay, so as we cover this, I want you to think about as well, because mind you, I said this is a musician's channel, but this topic affects everybody. In that, remember weeks ago, for those of you who have been following, where I talked about the prices of concert tickets. Well, if you were to go to the UK from out of the country and you wanted to perform there, how much would you charge for a ticket and who would show up, right? Because what musicians tend to run into, and this is probably the conversation you as fans that you're watching don't really get to have, what musicians run into is that we may be priced out of market sometimes. Like, you can be a trumpet playing independent solo artist and you have albums and, you know, you got your online presence locked down, you got a website, and you got a traveling budget and things like that. But if you have a situation where you can't battle with, let's say, Ticketmaster, and you're trying to figure out how to book a venue, where would you place your venue? What would you set the pricing to? Now, I'm saying this because I'm leaning into what kind of demographic are you shaping when we're identifying your audience. And this is important to understand because we'll have situations, at least here in America, where we'll brag about how cool and tough or sneaky or scary our friends are. But then when our friends do some sneaky, scary, tough guy stuff, we start calling the police, or we have more victims than fans, right? So this conversation is really going to be internal for a lot of people as we watch this. So next we're going to react to a clip from a creator, Nick Shirley. Some of you have heard of him because he has a huge YouTube platform. But he sits down with a woman on a park bench who shares her personal experience with assault, arguing that communism and total prison abolition are the answers to stopping predators. It's an intense look at how ideology and trauma can actually collide when people feel the current justice system has failed them, right? And the reason this is important to understand is because, as we saw in the pamphlet, it had information that we would assume would just be like, duh, just like basic information. But both being a perpetrator and a victim, they may not know what they're doing to have been wrong. Right? There are actually victims who don't know they've actually been wronged, or they have a response to what has happened to them that negatively impacts them. And then perpetrators are actually doing something that they were either raised or believed was normal. They didn't think that anything was wrong with it. And then some actually find out it was wrong and then have this bit of shock, actually trying to understand what they did, right? So traditional incarceration doesn't really rehabilitate offenders and advocates for dismantling capitalist structure prisons in favor of collectivist and rehabilitation models, right? That's the core argument that the interviewer is going to have. The contrast is that high-level political theories against immediate victim safety exist when laws are perceived as overly lenient or accountability breaks down and the burden of protection gets dumped onto individuals and local workers. And that would be like the man of the house or the police, right? Instead of us having like a justice system that would hold these rapists and assault people who commit assaults accountable. Sometimes people will actually go in for these assaults and only get 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And then they're back out. Some are doing some crimes and they'll get a plea deal and they'll get multiple offenses because the system keeps basically re-emerging them back into the community. So whenever we think of these things, subcultures will often clash over security. Some spaces reject all security spaces, right? You've seen people that like to go to Burning Man, and there was a lot of assault cases that were coming out of that. Not really cases, but really claims, because again, a lot of victims weren't coming out as victims until years later. And then there's other venues that require strict enforcement. Like if you go to Vegas or maybe even certain stadiums and things like that, it's very, 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 very strict. There's a lot of security just for these reasons, right? So practical safety and strict boundaries must take precedence over ideological theories when managing live spaces. So if we understand that, and if we agree with that, let me know if you do or don't. Put a 1 in the chat if you agree that we have to take strict boundaries for live performances. Then how could someone who was actually a victim of the thing that the security was meant to prevent advocate at least for the perpetrator to continue to be free at the cost of committing the same act again? Let's see what she has to say.
What do you think about the rise of communism here inside of the United States?
The rise of communism? That would be hard for me to answer unless we have a shared definition of communism.
Yeah, so for instance, right now here in New York City, they're now freezing the rent. They want Medicare for all. That's free Medicare. They want to tax the rich, redistribute the wealth. Zoran Mandami, he also wants prisoners to get released. He's trying to get rid of Rikers Island and abolishing private ownership in some.
Okay, so with everything he just explained there, trying to freeze rent, get rid of private property in terms of like landlords being able to set their own rent prices and stuff like that. And then, of course, getting rid of Rikers Island and things like that. This is similar to what happened in Ceuta, where the Supreme Court basically ruled that getting into the country by sea was not, I believe it was a deportable reason, a reason to be deported, right? And so people took advantage. So what we're seeing here is that the advocacy for the ideas they have, meaning I wouldn't want to go to prison, I wouldn't want to experience prison, bleeds into somebody who has completely different ideas to see that as an opportunity. But which one of them needs a pamphlet?
Cases as well.
Okay, thank you for this definition. My thoughts are pretty positive. I feel aligned. I can't really speak to specifics, but I think I'm pretty pro-communism. I'm pro making things accessible. I'm pretty pro getting rid of prisons.
How can you like to get rid of prisons?
Well, like the system of criminality is a very strange way to interact with, like, I guess humanity in general. And like,
okay, we're going to break it down. So the idea of criminality is a strange way to interact with humanity in general. How does that correlate with the person that commits the crime? Right? Because this is interesting, and it'll probably bleed into another video that I'm working on. But this is about 100 years ago, in the 1920s, here in the United States, we had a huge shift in what culture was going to look like here. We started to get into the industrialization. I believe we had like a world war going on, or getting ready to happen. And so what we needed to figure out was, how do we get men to be workers and men to build families and things like that? And in order for that to happen, we could no longer live amongst the type of men that wanted to be bandits, vagabonds, the type of people who believe that you can just take what you want and there was no actual sovereignty to ownership and things like that. So the difference in ideology 100 years ago, and again, I'm gonna make a whole nother video on this, began to cause a clash amongst men in general. And this is where you get the rise of, let's say, the gentleman, the husband, the housewife, and things like that, versus just woman and man, right? So with what she's explaining here, she's explaining something, in my opinion, that sounds more like, if it were up to me, people who commit crimes would have a better reason to not commit the crimes. Therefore, if we give them reasons to not commit the crimes, we wouldn't have to label them as criminals. And then they would be able to, provide for themselves and function in society. The other side of this conversation, which she probably won't be able to have on a face-to-face level, is why someone wants to commit a crime. And that was the part that 100 years ago here in the United States, we couldn't really answer for. We still haven't. And it was that people wanted their privacy, they wanted their entitlement, they wanted their own ownership and things like that. People wanted their own land and have their own families and things like that. But the culture that of which they derived all that from couldn't necessarily cooperate with everyone else, if that makes sense, right? So that what that would mean is that you would have a family who had a son who thought that women could marry, or women couldn't pick who they marry. You had families who believed that women didn't have the ability to travel or work or anything like that, right? And so what they would then wind up doing is living and functioning within all the other people within that society amongst the other women there, right? So what would be a crime to one man would have just been a cultural circumstance for another man. So you found a lot of situations where the cultures would clash, and the decision on how to punish the wrong that was done to the victim became controversial. So what she's explaining here would be in an extreme circumstance of if you were in the Wild West in the 1920s and a group of bandits came into your town and shot up the saloon and killed 8 people. The law enforcement there would hunt the men down and 9 times out of 10 hang them. But what she's advocating for is that instead of hanging them, we find a way to rehabilitate the bandits back into society, which would then mean that what they had done wrong was not punishable by death, it was punishable by rehabilitation. So now you have a situation where the conversation moves from you're not looking at a victim anymore. You're now looking at someone who had been victimized by circumstance. Like, you're not looking at the victim of a crime anymore. You're looking at a victim of circumstance. So you have, in the 1900s example, bandits going into a saloon shooting people is viewed by her or someone with this thinking as a greater societal circumstance rather than an intentional decision made by a bad actor. So now we fast forward today, we can advocate for this in a variety of ways depending on how we word the language, right? So when you've seen the words domestic abuse, that means one thing, right? When you see sexual assault, that means one thing. But when you see rape, that means another thing. When you see battery, you see that means another thing. You see murder, that thing means another thing. So when you apply these labels to people, then you start to see an identity of who is actually committing these acts, right? And a lot of people would like it to be a race. They would like it to be a religion. They would like it to be a gender. But in reality, you have to look at the actual behavior. And so what she's advocating for is that if we look at the behavior as criminal, then there would be way more humans that would be viewed as criminal. So it would feel better for her to not do that and actually rehabilitate humanity. Now, I laid it out that way because it's really, really hard to have that laid out without someone interrupting, disagreeing, or finding a way to, turn that around. But in my opinion, after all that I've said, I think that what she's advocating for is something that she may or may not completely understand because she herself is a victim and not a perpetrator, right? The conversation she would have to be exposed to would be that of which would be held with a perpetrator, because then a perpetrator would explain to her why someone would be a victim and why they would choose what they would choose to do. And it wouldn't be I guess you can say, environmental circumstance that led them to make that decision.
Things that as a species we're not interested in, like perpetuating, I think it's kind of backwards. And so I'm not certain what prisons are actually doing for our society. And so...
Would you like to have criminals out in the open?
Do I want criminals out in the open? Sure. I'm fine with that because the idea of a criminal is like a little bit funny to me.
Okay, so that was kind of my point. And I figured that based on what she said, the idea of a criminal is funny to her. So if this was the 1920s, she would be of the group of women that her, family and things like that, they would prefer to not have as much government involved in their business. Because if you then identify somebody as a criminal, that means that then we now have to treat you a certain way in society. So though she may be noble in her thinking, it then would mean, just like I said about people taking advantage of certain laws like the Ceuta border, that would then mean if I wanted to intentionally take advantage of her belief system or her culture, she is allowed me to, right? Which means I may not pick her as a victim, but someone else may be, and she would be advocating for it.
Let's just say somebody who has raped a woman.
Totally.
Would you like them to be out in the street?
I think my answer is yes, even though that's a challenging answer to say.
So
It
if
would
you
be
got
to
raped, would
me.
you like your rapist to be out in the street?
Well, like, let me finish, because I have been raped, and they are out in the street, and I'm not sure, like, them going to jail is a solution to, like, whatever's going on inside their heart, or...
Okay, so this is why the pamphlet was made. This right here. She says she's actually been a victim, and the person who was the perpetrator is actually out free. Now, we don't know why, if they served their time and they're free, or if they were never charged, or if she's never actually come out and actually sent them through a case, and this is just something she's saying. We don't know, right? But the reason we need a pamphlet, because she's saying, and she's advocating for that, there may be something going on in his heart that caused him to do what he did to her. Now, the other side of this conversation is that as a guy hearing this, there's a litany of feelings that I feel that I can't really, I guess you can say, express upon her, because this is not my circumstance to speak on, right? But as a guy hearing this, it makes me wonder, had she had been a victim under any other person's, I guess you can say, authority, meaning like they don't agree with her, how would you be able to respond and deal with this kind of situation, right? For example, if you believe in what the pamphlet told you, in that this is a serious crime and it should be punishable by law, but then the victim themselves are telling you that they advocate for their freedom because the perpetrator may have something going on in their heart, which should you follow through with as far as dealing with the greater problem of other victims, other perpetrators, and things like that? Again, the details as to why she thinks the way she thinks could be a number of reasons. That is why the pamphlet covered domestic abuse as well, and consent, right? Because her definition of a criminal differs from Nick Shirley's, which is possible that her definition of rape may differ from Nick Shirley's. And that's only because if we read what the pamphlet says, it's sex without consent. But that could be sex without consent before or after a relationship. That can be sex without consent for any number of reasons that we can think of in terms of the law, right? So what she's having a conversation about is coming from her perspective, but I want to know in the chat, do you guys agree with her? Do you believe somebody who has committed a rape, by your definition, because we don't have a standard definition going across the board right now in this conversation, but by your definition, do you think that they should go free while we rehabilitate them on the things that are going on in their heart?
Even my own heart that, like, contributed to that experience that I'm having. And I don't want more people to get raped, but I don't know for certain that going into a jail in the United States is going to shift anything inside of their, like, operating system so that they'll make a different choice again.
Wow, well, thank you guys so much for your time. And
he can't even process what she said. But yeah, so essentially, the reason I'm pointing that out is because this pamphlet shows us that there is a push to stop the act, but we really don't know how to do it with the advocacy that we have in front of us, right? So for her, she's an American. It's possible that for her, she doesn't like the prison system based on her education of it, so much so that the criminals going into it seem more of a victim than her herself, who was a victim of the criminal. So she's literally advocating, you know what I'm saying? So she's advocating for the person that perpetrated against her. But somebody on the outside, like a police officer or even a judge in that instance, is supposed to commit to the justice system, right? And so when we see these repeat offenders coming out of the prison system, you're like, wow, this guy had 10 assaults against 10 different women in 10 different states. how was he not like locked up forever? Well, a part of it is that when we look at these quotas and how judges are really supposed to navigate the law, their hands are a little bit tied as far as whether or not they should be locking people up, giving them 30 years for assaults, or putting them through rehabilitation programs and what we actually advocate for. So that's important to understand. But now let's shift over to how communities and law enforcement are actually pushing back against all of this. We're looking at how transit police in the UK are deploying real-time technology to catch predators on late-night transit alongside organizations working every day to support survivors. So they have organizations like the British Transport Police, BTP, actively using dedicated text lines, which is 61016, and the Railway Guardian app reporting to target plainclothes patrols and intercept predators. They're also using AI, artificial intelligence, in the CCTV cameras to use pattern matching and rapid incident geolocation, as well as forensic evidence tracking, and that's speeding up the response times across transport hubs. So for musicians, this means gig workers and session players constantly traveling alone with gear during late night transit hours. You will have proactive transit support, policing directly, and safeguarding night shifts for creatives and traveling fans, of course. Because like I said, I could have a show in the UK, right? And I'd be like, good night, everybody, blah, 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 blah. And then the curtains close and you guys got to get home safe, right? So it's important that we have this conversation because, in my opinion, at least I'll say, this is our responsibility as musicians. The music industry is supposed to be fun and dope, so we got to make it fun and dope. And that's the main thing. But let's actually get into the next video and see how the UK is actually pushing back and catching these nasty, nasty, dirty creeps and throwing their punk asses in jail.
I'm under arrest for outright public decency.
Predators arrested on Britain's railways for crimes against women and girls.
It's violating. I look down and there is a man masturbating on me.
We've been on patrol with the British Transport Police as they crack down on violence against women and girls across the rail network.
Oh, it's this guy who sat down.
From plainclothes patrols to the CCTV control room, officers say they're using every tool available to catch offenders. But will it make women safer?
Last night I was sexually assaulted by two men on the train who grabbed my ass literally as I got off the train.
The rise of...
Okay, I want to pause here because she says she was sexually assaulted. When I hear that phrase, sexually assaulted, my brain goes immediately to full-on penetrative rape. Now, what this pamphlet has proven is that for many people, they don't even know what any of it means, right? So a little bit of what it actually means, sexual assault, is what she explained there, was grabbing of butts, grabbing of, body parts, intimate areas and things like that. You ever seen in the romance movies where like the guy, he presses the girl on a wall and like kisses her? Sexual assault. You ever seen a dude like hug a girl real tight and then like grab her butt? Sexual assault. In some cases, you can even like pick up a girl and like swing her around the room like you be seeing those anime con dudes do, and that could be considered sexual assault. So the umbrella term sexual assault there makes my mind go to one thing, but it really does mean a lot of different things. So when you see the cases or you see the charges on people's paperwork and stuff, maybe ladies, even some of you be on like dating apps and stuff, you doing background checks and you see it, figure out the details if you care. But if you don't care, then just know that, it's an umbrella term. I guess that's all I really wanted to point out about that.
Recorded violence against women and girls on the transport network is being fueled by better reporting.
By the time I had time to process what had happened, they were already smiling at me, grinning at me through the train, on their way with the doors shut.
Recorded.
Now that's the part that makes this video, I guess, more important to me, is the pamphlet keeps repeating over and over, this is a serious crime. This is a serious crime. This is a serious crime. So if those dudes were sitting there giggling like little girls after they did something like that, what's supposed to seriously happen to them?
Offences are up almost 18%.
If you notice something out of the ordinary, Speak to a member of staff or text us on 696. We'll get it sorted.
And this is the second incident that Esme has had to report to the British Transport Police. What happened recently must have taken you back to 2024. Do you mind telling us what happened to you then?
I was travelling home at 5:50 p.m. on the Jubilee line. It was a very, very busy train again, standing room only, pressed up against each other. I was travelling with a friend. I felt someone kind of poking me in my bum, and I thought, oh, like that's a bit strange. Moved slightly down. I felt it again. And you know the first time you question yourself, did that happen? Has that happened? Second time I went, no, like there is definitely. I looked down and there is a man masturbating on me on the Jubilee line at rush hour.
The perpetrators in both cases haven't been caught.
What?
How? I don't understand. Now, she's probably going to explain, but this is a thing that's not new. So don't, like, if you're feeling triggered hearing that, just know that it's not a new thing. So it's not something, again, when I say like the pamphlet, be like, it's a serious crime, it's a serious crime. It's not a thing that these type of guys, in this example, think is going to be of a huge detriment to them. Like she said, it was 5 p.m. rush hour with a bunch of people around. Now, the reason I jumped out and said how, because the emotional trigger in me is thinking you probably would have jumped out your skin screaming and windmilling fists, just causing a whole scene, right? That's my assumption.
What else can you do? They literally said in the email, fingers crossed that in the future we might get a positive ID. They just have to wait and hope that maybe these people might assault you again, or they might offend again, and they'll catch them someplace else. Right.
And usually in those instances, we've seen, at least here in America, the past couple of cases I've been studying, right? But I've been studying them, and there's an escalation that usually happens. If he gets away with it that time, it's no longer, train gropings. Then it's like attacking a prostitute or something. And then if he gets away with that one because she's a prostitute and don't want to report it that she's been doing something illegal, then he'll just straight up kidnap a person, right? So they'll see escalations a lot of times. But again, when you say this is a serious crime, what does that really mean?
I'm going to explain to you. You're currently under arrest for outrage and public decency. I'll explain to you.
Whether it's on the train, in the station toilets, or on the platform, British Transport Police say they're now better equipped to track down offenders because of a new task force set up earlier this year.
This is British Transport Police.
They need Tyler Riviera out there. Just pickpocket.
Esme's text to the British Transport Police in June was one of 27,364 messages that came into its contact centre in Birmingham last month.
You've got someone that's just texted us saying that I'm on a train from Paddock Wood to Strood on 1836. There's two boys. They're taking photos of me and recording videos of me on the train. They're also harassing me and making me feel uncomfortable. So what we're going to do is we're going to grade it to serious public order that comes under harassment.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask her for any descriptions to help with officers. And also, I'm going to see if she can move to a safer location. That message has gone to her. We've done the log.
And at the time that that's happening, then the officers are now dealing with it
Exactly.
in the other room. Right.
So they're picking it up. They have updated it to say that at the moment there isn't any officers in that area. The officers have put that they're going to make contact with her, but she's replied back saying that.
Okay, so right here in your brain, and this is what I mean by the pamphlet being like, it's a serious crime, it's a serious crime, it's a serious crime. Who are you talking to, Mr. Pamphlet Man, right? With what he's explaining, in theory, works great, right? But let's put this in our brain here. This person that texted him in this example was on a train, texted the little hotline, and let's say by the time 30, 40, even 2 minutes later, he texted her back saying, okay, give me a description. I've alerted nearby officers. He's then told there's no officers within the area. What they're not telling us is how wide of a radius that quote unquote area is, but then also what is the training for officers that aren't in the area that receive a text like this? Because in your brain, right, and I'm sure in your brain, if you were on the train and you felt uncomfortable that 2 boys were taking pictures of you making rude remarks, that there would be a response very quickly. There's a famous song by Public Enemy called 911 is a Joke. You guys should check it out. But the point here that I'm making is that though this technology exists, the greater reason why that pamphlet exists is still more powerful.
It's too late. The boys have gone off, and she doesn't need any help. I think a lot of people might.
So she said it's too late. The boys are gone.
I think that it's a bot, so they kind of like test it as well sometimes. But I think when they realise that there is a human and someone's replied back, you do get like thank yous and oh thanks for sorting this out for us, and or even if it's been sorted, they'll always like come back to you and say like thank you.
We'll get it sorted. That's 61016. See it, say it, sorted.
British Transport Police gave us exclusive access to follow the task force which is proactively targeting predatory behaviour.
We've got this absolute rabbit warren of tunnels, escalators and platforms, so we've got real risk areas.
They're using plainclothed and uniformed officers on the London Underground. What is the aim of this operation?
So these operations are designed to intervene before offending will take place, and with this what we don't want is someone to be spooked by the uniform presence and offend on another part of the network. So we'll break it down here, we'll pop up somewhere else. So it's intelligence-led for us, it's unpredictable for them.
And all this is happening while women are travelling through here completely unaware of what's happening?
Yes, we'd like it to be more overt, we'd like a larger uniform presence, but unfortunately the tactics that we need to employ that are effective involve plainclothes officers such as myself, uniformed officers working in tandem. So it is.
That's actually a great point. 2 points I'd like to make here, and then this is again another polarizing point. He mentioned how you would like it to be overt and things like that about the level of protection you have for people, but 2 things I learned. One was that security doesn't feel like security if you can see it. So if you've seen like all the lasers and the spikes and the bombs and the missiles and the guns and the people and the type of assassins and the type of mindsets needed to give you a peace of mind, you wouldn't have a peace of mind. You'd be like, what is out there and why is it there? So there's that. And then on the other side of it, as here in the United States, we have the, I don't know what they're called, a department, but we have ICE. They're the deportation people, right? And over here, we have people that don't like security so much so that the simple sight of ICE causes them to then disrupt, sabotage, or at least intervene in the investigation. Now, some people feel like they just don't like ICE and they just don't want to help them. But on the other hand, there are people who don't like pedophiles and, gang members more. So it's up in the air. So really what he's highlighting here is that, yeah, we could send a bunch of cops down here, but it would just basically make all the creeps go into hiding and find better tactics to get around the obvious. And then at the same time, you'd also have people help them. They would actually sabotage us. They wouldn't be themselves perps, but they would help them.
It's not as high visibility as some members of the travelling public may like, but it is equally, if not more, effective.
Oh, it's this guy. So there's a guy that's just being spoken to by officers down there, and that's because he's been displaying some of these behaviours that are classed as unusual, and he's been sat there for quite a while. So we're about half an hour into this operation now. How is it going so far?
So far we've had 2 or 3 stops, one based on quite explicit sexualised behaviour towards women walking past, one with an innocent explanation, but without those interventions we wouldn't find that out.
You've been doing this in front of women and children.
In February 2025, officers boarded a train to arrest this man after a woman had called 999. He was arrested for outraging public decency, but also was wanted for rape. He's now in jail because Dorothea reported him in the moment.
Well, it's just completely humiliating, for one. It's violating. It's just awful. Even though he didn't come into contact with me and physically touch me or harm me, it's just as offensive and assaulting, you feel just as unsafe. I think in my specific situation, I was on a busy train, it was 10 a.m, I was in my hiking gear, I didn't have any makeup on, I wasn't drunk, I wasn't in a vulnerable state at all. The most important thing is that I reported it because of what he had already done. If I hadn't reported, that's what some people would deem as a smaller crime that happened to me, he wouldn't have got found for what he did to the other victim. I think about her every single day.
In the CCTV control room, British Transport Police have access to 150,000 cameras on the railway network.
But then you've also got Network Rail as well, so you've got all across
the country.
You've got eyes everywhere.
Yeah.
All of the appeals to find perpetrators of sexual abuse on the network come through this unit.
So when we find him, we're like, yeah, sure, that's him. Yeah, we'll go back, we'll double check, make sure descriptions match and things like that. And then we'll take our still images.
So what are you going to do with these images now?
So this one, because it's a sexual offence and as it's a forced priority, we send these images out as a distribution to all officers on the ground. So someone might know him, or we've got tasking teams that are attached to certain stations throughout the shift. So they will have first dibs at these images and they'll be actively trawling the lines to see if he's still around, still on the network, etc.
So that's actually pretty dope. And it also gives you a lot of good hope about law enforcement in general. But I think the greater conversation most people are going to have is about who's the pamphlet for? Because if you think about the pamphlet on the front cover says asylum seekers, right? And asylum seekers makes people think of a certain group of people or a certain religion or a certain place or a certain demographic, right? But it really makes me think it's more for people who aren't in this system here, right? If you are from the UK and you got a record like that little Asian dude, then we can easily find you. But if you're just a random, then it's harder to find you. But you wouldn't need to be found if you read the pamphlet, I guess, right? Is that the thing? But really what we're noticing though, when it comes to musicianship and stuff like that, most of what these women have done to help with this situation is really just make sure they report and be actual advocates for punishing the criminals in a lot of ways, right? And so now when I think of the conversations you can usually have with, let's say, a victim or something like that, let's say if I hear a story or something, my brain always goes to be brave, break the rules if you got to, chew somebody's ear off or something, right? And it's because I was just raised to just never back down, fight, and losing is something that you would have to do, not want to do, right? And so when I think of that, I want to kind of encourage you with something positive, right? I found a funny video and actually two funny videos. I found one funny video where this guy was actually trying to get somebody to express themselves. But he said, are you a human or are you a pattern? And what he was highlighting was how you can actually think yourself into doing the wrong thing. And he was basically teaching people how to improvise. And this would be great for you guys who want to get on stage and things like that. But he was teaching them to be human, meaning it's the human experience to protect yourself, to scream when something is painful, to show anger, to cry, to laugh. But you've been raised and conditioned to control when that happens. So even if I were to just ask you and there would be nothing wrong, you probably couldn't even just scream at the top of your lungs.
You a human or a pattern?
I don't know.
Do you want to find out?
Yeah.
Scream as loud as you can. A human could, and when I say human, I mean think back to child you. I have two daughters, right? 6 and almost 4. Before the conditioning takes over, before the patterns start getting conditioned in, they can easily scream. They can be loud. They'd have no problem. I'm like, hey, scream. They'd look at me and laugh and scream. That's the human side. That doesn't mean scream all the time. I'm not saying go out in the street and everyone you talk to scream. But are you able to, or is a pattern blocking that? Go as loud as you physically can. Don't do it. You are not human. You are slave to the pattern. Give her a hand, yeah. None of this, no, look at them and be like, that's right. So 1, good, yes, that. So you saw the pattern take over. Now, you blasted through, awesome. As soon as you blasted through, what did the pattern do? Look down in shame, downplay it. Wow.
Oh, my bad. My mic was muted. That was a great point about how a lot of victims have to actually navigate the responsibility of having to report something that happened to them. So we would have the conversation a lot of times and be like, oh, you guys, are usually scared to speak out, or you're being blackmailed, or you're being pressured to not speak out. So it makes it harder for you to get to the perps. But it's a bit of conditioning that we kind of have amongst one another, whether it's men or women. Men, we tell them not to speak out because of shame. And usually it's the same for women amidst all the other things that come with it, right? So when we really have this conversation, we have to make sure that if we plan on ever having this conversation with a victim, to understand that there is a human aspect and a conditioning aspect. The human side of us is like, yeah, scream as loud as you can and report and go crazy and stuff like that. But we've been conditioned, or at least we believe we've been conditioned, to be docile, freeze, don't make a scene, be scared. Fear is a big conditioning factor where you think, oh, what if they hurt me and things like that. You'll start to get into your brain. But you have to be smart. So don't just, break a rule just because it's a rule. Actually make it smart. The other side of that conversation for victims is usually about preparation and prevention, and trying to make sure you are in control of how people view you and treat you and things like that. But you can only do so much, right? In reality, like I said, you can't choose to be a victim. But let's actually take a look at how we can view from a woman's perspective what it means to communicate through, I guess you can say, your presence.
Run an experiment on skirt length and the result is going to confuse you. The shorter skirt got more attention, but almost every woman preferred the longer one. And that's when I realized that attention and elegance are not the same thing. But I got more views, more likes, more comments. Yes, but what kind of attention? People noticed me. They looked or they admired. They looked. And women, they chose you.
Okay, so if it was kind of fast for you guys, essentially what she was saying was she ran a experiment, I guess, on her Instagram where she would pose in a short skirt and a long skirt. And I know this conversation is usually tied around like agency and things like that, but this is really more so about reaction, at least in this video. And so what she showed was that the reaction she got from the shorter skirt was more likes and more comments of people saying, wow, you look sexy, you look cool, you look dope, I love how your energy is. But then when she wore the longer skirt, the one on the right here, it showed a bit more elegance, but she had more attraction from women. So the reaction she got was more attention from men in the shorter skirt, but way more attention from women in the longer skirt. What does that mean for us, right? In terms of why we would make a pamphlet, right? It means that we need to be in control of how we are perceived. Now, most of us would rather wear the short skirt, but make a pamphlet telling women why they should wear the short skirt, because that's the point of her videos, to say, hey, I'm selling this look. But what women want is the longer skirt. So would you rather just give women the longer skirt or tell them to read the pamphlet, right? Now, a lot of you are going to say, I should be able to wear the long skirt and do whatever I want. But let's see why she may or may not agree with you.
Because elegance isn't loud. So what? I shouldn't wear what I want? No, wear whatever you want. Just understand what it communicates. And what does this say? That you're being seen, but not necessarily in the way you think. A lot of women said something really interesting. They don't avoid short skirts because they're insecure. They avoid them because of where the attention goes. I saw a woman in Paris recently. Drop dead gorgeous, beautifully dressed, but the skirt was way too short. It changed the entire message. Not wrong, just different codes.
Okay, so that's actually pretty interesting. So she was saying that a lot of women don't wear short skirts because they're insecure or they feel like they're not cute. It's that they don't want the attention that they're trying to garner to go to the wrong place. So if you want somebody to like you for being smart, well, then don't direct their attention to where it's going to go. The other side of that is guys being in the position to understand and control their intention as well. But ladies can't control that part, right? All you can do is just kind of advertise and then control yourself, which is why you don't need a pamphlet, supposedly. Maybe you do. But I think we have one more video here, and we're actually going to deep dive into how dancers at Star Garden in North Hollywood staged a 15-month strike and picket after club security consistently refused to protect them from abusive, threatening patrons. And this followed by management retaliation, and then when they raised safety concerns, they voted unanimously to unionize with the Actors Equity Association, making Star Garden the only unionized strip club in the United States. Let's get into it.
The union recognition of the Star Garden dancers was a historical milestone for the strip club industry and the live entertainment sector, as well as a victory for workers' rights and democracy. It was the result of a 15-month battle that involved protests, petitions, and legal challenges from both sides. The dancers faced unsafe and unfair working conditions, such as harassment, discrimination, and termination without cause. They decided to organize and demand respect and dignity from their employer. They joined the Actors Equity Association, a national union representing more than 51,000 actors and stage managers in live entertainment. They became the first group of strippers to form a union in America.
Okay, so just like the law enforcement, it is upon us as citizens to take advantage of how the law works, so that way we can punish those and control how culture actually works for us, right? Just like I said 100 years ago, here in the United States, we tried to kind of shape the world for workers and families, not so much just vagabonds and bandits, right? So here we actually see the first unionized strip club. This is important to understand because when I'm born in 1992. I've been hearing about strip club violence, sexual assaults, club shootings, fraud, scamming, and all kinds of stuff for years, decades. I'm 30. So when you're hearing this, how many of you would advocate for this, right? Now, when you advocate for this, you got to understand what it is you're advocating for. So this is a group of strippers. This doesn't represent the modest woman, right? But we're unionizing this because the group of strippers are being, quote unquote, accosted by threatening patrons. So this is where it gets controversial. The bullet points on I believe the second page of the pamphlet was talking about women have the freedom to work where they want to work, learn what they want to learn, make money and things like that. If you believe that, a part of that, at least in the technicality, is that these same women can want to be strippers. But then if you don't believe that, then you would then believe that there are certain jobs that women shouldn't have. Now, whether you want to go with the gender dynamics, whether you want to go with religion, or whether you want to go with age, whether you want to go with culture, whatever the reason is, this shows that there is actually an appetite from women that want to be in these types of work environments, right? So now when we advocate for musicians, and I think about the female artists, a lot of the female artists have these similar struggles, but they can't align themselves with that of strippers, because you wouldn't be advocating for sex work. You would be advocating for musicians. So when we think about this, I think of, let's say, ASCAP. There's a lot of actual musical unions and things like that. But the culture around a lot of what you surround yourself with as a musician is going to shape the environment. So the reason this is going to be controversial is because some people would say, well, then just don't be a stripper, right? The environment breeds those types of men. Saying those types of men can't go would ruin the customer base of what it is that you are participating in. So that's why it's important to understand that on levels, because the reason you would need a pamphlet is because the strippers here in this example would be the ones creating a pamphlet for the customers. You're basically telling the customers, hey, you can't abuse or, threaten strippers and things like that. They should just be allowed to be strippers, whereas the customers just simply don't believe that. They just don't want to read the pamphlet.
The union recognition means that the dancers will have a voice and a seat at the bargaining table with the management of the club. They will be able to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement that covers issues such as health and safety, wages, benefits, scheduling, and grievance procedures. They will also have the protection and support of their union and the labor movement. The union recognition also sets a precedent and an example for other strippers who want to unionize their workplaces and have a say in how their clubs are run. It shows that strippers are workers who deserve respect and rights, and that they can organize and fight for them. The union recognition of the Star Garden Dancers is a historic achievement that could transform the strip club industry and the live entertainment sector. It is also a victory for workers' rights and democracy in a time when unions are under attack and workers are facing challenges from the pandemic, automation, and globalization.
The biggest issue that people are going to see with trying to do something like this on a mass level is both men and women disagree with what, at least in this example, what the certain women's demographic is that is asking for unionization, but then also the appetite for this kind of environment is greater than trying to fix this, right? So like I said, the pamphlet kept repeating that this is a serious crime. This is a serious crime. But then you would put a pamphlet out. Like, I don't know what else they put pamphlets out, like, you know, fraud pamphlets. Maybe they got murder pamphlets. Maybe you shouldn't speed pamphlets. I know they do pamphlets for drug addiction and things like that, but it's interesting, right? But if this was an informational conversation and you had fun and you have a bunch of questions for me, let me know. Let's have a conversation in the comments and let's grow this for our future musicians and things like that, and make sure everything is copacetic and doing great. And also, if you guys want to find out how you can support different organizations, let me know in the comments and I'll leave the links for you guys, so that way you can actually maybe send out donations, support different organizations and stuff like that too. So this was Musician Talks with DameSmiff, and we covered how to defeat the rapists. But I will see you in the next episode, y'all. I am out. Peace.